you look through history, you will find that markets have been different. And so as new problems and new situations come about, markets have to change. And it also recognizes that the market doesn't solve every problem. It doesn't solve every economic problem, but of course it doesn't solve every social problem, every social issue. And this tradition also stresses very strongly that economics is not a hard science. And my attraction to this tradition is as much their critique of neoclassical economics as a system of thought. And this has become very popular. Even some Catholics are arguing that economics is a positive science, and the bishops and popes should stay out of this. This is like, they don't give advice to physicists, they shouldn't give advice to economists, and that there's a truth, an economic truth, that's the natural law in economics is similar to the natural physical laws, and this is something this tradition completely rejects. And as I've said I'd say about 80% of the presentations I've given, there is nothing you can say in economics that is meaningful that is also a positive statement, that is an is statement with no normative or value judgments, connotations anywhere. When I first made that statement, I was at a conference in Dublin, and someone said, well, what about the rate of unemployment is 15%? And so that's an objective statement. It's an is statement. I said, yeah, but what is unemployment? We have to define unemployment. In fact, at that time, the Irish government was changing the definition of unemployment as a way to get it down, rather than creating jobs, by saying that everyone who was unemployed over 50 was now retired. So they had a big press conference on how they got unemployment down. But unemployment is not a natural fact. You know, it's not like the properties of this wood. It is a social fact, something that is created socially, something that is defined socially. And how we define it is very much based on the values we accept, our vision of society, our vision of reality. You know, so it's very much informed by our philosophical preconceptions. So economics, when it loses touch with the actual economy and concentrates on just mathematical models, I've always said that most of the great economists of the last 120 years, not Keynes and Galbraith, but the neoclassical tradition, have been second-rate engineers doing third-rate math. Most of them fell out or dropped out of engineering programs and then went into economics because the math isn't as hard and they could really excel at that. But when you mathematize all your economic relationships, you lose the historical context, you lose the structure. As my mentor, Robert Halbriner, said, mathematics gives economics a great deal of rigor, but alas, also a great deal of mortis. And as economists, we're here to give useful advice to solve real problems. And so this idea that economics is a hard science allowed so many policymakers, Democrat and Republican, to deregulate all over the place, assuming that markets will take care of themselves and giving us a steady stream of financial crises and not solving problems such as poverty and inequality. Now, sound economics have rejected the laissez-faire approach, that individual interest always leads to the common good. Yet, once in the 40s and 50s it became mathematized, we moved away from understanding the full aspect of human behavior and just concentrated on equations. We became divorced from how people really are motivated, what really influences their behavior. Okay, I want to try to catch up on time a bit here, but what I would argue is that we need evidence-based economic policy and not ideology. And there are many ideas that are very strongly held, you see it on CNBC constantly, that are just wrong, but they keep on being spouted out. The ideology supports it, but the evidence doesn't, such as the United States is overtaxed. The government is spending too much money. Our tax rate is much less than the vast majority of advanced capitalist countries, and we spend a lot less, and they're just as rich, or the differences would be hard to measure. The OECD, which is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, did a huge study on is there a relationship between the size of the government. The government has to get really big before it impacts on the dynamics aspect of the private economy. And you can argue that at some time Sweden might have gotten there, but you can certainly never give an empirical argument that the United States got there. The idea of supply-side economics, that if we cut taxes on the rich, somehow this will balance the budget, well, that didn't happen. Trickle-down economics, when we give the rich more money, that it gets to everyone else, there's no statistical evidence that that happens. In fact, when we look at the periods where the poor have done best when we've concentrated on supporting the lower part of the income stream, and taxes on the rich were much higher. Almost everyone on CNBC thinks that we're going to get rampant inflation because of monetarism, that too much money creates inflation. It doesn't. The evidence is not there. The causality is the exact opposite. Inflation causes the money supply to explode. But we've been growing the money supply like mad for 15 years. There isn't anyone in the Federal Reserve who believes Milton Friedman. Well, I think there's one guy left, but they keep him around just for tradition. But no, the connection just isn't there. It never was there. Inflation, the phenomenon of inflation is very different than just too much money. And then also with deregulation, that the businesses were too regulated, or that equality efficiency. If we do things to help the poor or the middle class, if we promote equality, will hurt the growth in the economy. The exact opposite. The policy that has had the biggest impact on economic growth in the United States, giving everyone free education, also has given us the most equality, the most opportunity. In fact, the two biggest things that promote economic growth, education, research, and development, have no connection with creating inequality or market signals. So there just isn't any evidence. Certainly you can create equality and hurt efficiency. And you can create efficiency and kill equality. That's what Ronald Reagan did by his policies and cutting the taxes on the rich, raising them on the poor. But there's no necessary trade-off. Okay, so when we look at Catholic social thought, I think we have to remember a couple things. One, it's moral theology, it's not economic theory. Catholic social thought has to exist in dialogue. It has to dialogue with the social sciences. It doesn't just sit around and talk to itself. It has to engage that. It's the principles that Joe Kaczorski used to say, it's the principles that are non-negotiable to us, but we still have to use prudential judgment and interact with the real world in terms of solving problems. So I was at a conference on Henry George and Catholic social thought, and the Georgists were so upset because all these Catholic thinkers were getting up there saying, well, you know, we have a lot of principles, but we don't have a policy. And of course, all they have is a policy. They don't have anything. Well, they have a philosophy based on a policy, but that's doing everything backwards. And they got very frustrated. And I said, listen, different situations require different policies. The policy that was right for Adam Smith is different than the policy that's right today. You know, to have an idea that, oh, I can read some 19th century moral philosopher and come up with an economic policy for the 21st century, you know, the likelihood of that, you know, is very, very rare. Okay. Now, there could be an economic theory, and there might even be an economic policy, but that would be different from Catholic social thought. That's not Catholic social thought's role. And the tradition has rejected the idea the whole time of allowing markets free rein to do whatever they want, that morality doesn't have a role in either shaping economic institutions or informing economic practice. And the key difference between Catholic social thought and the Catholic tradition and neoclassical economics is how they view the human person. In fact, they don't have a person, they have a rational economic man. It's an individual who's autonomistic, and he's deterministic. He has no free will. If you study economics, if you get to the PhD level, eventually you will discover all choice is predetermined. Well, if it's predetermined, it's no longer choice. So in order to prove mathematically that an economy of free individuals reach a general equilibrium that is optimum, unique, and stable, you have to take away free will. You also have to take away the future. You can't have money. You can't have production. There's a lot of things you can't have. But losing free will is too high a price for a Catholic scholar, because we know that humans do have free will. We also know that humans are social by their nature.